board member Lofald is not here today. She's excused, and so I'm running the meeting. Assistant Superintendent Horton, go for it.
All right, thank you. First of all, I just want to, for our site celebration, I really just want to celebrate all sites this month. It's an exciting time of year. If you've been in a school this time of year, it is exciting. We have state testing going on. It's the end of the year. We're getting ready for next year. Everybody's excited for spring. The weather is changing, and we see a lot of things happening at our sites, and so just really a shout out and a celebration of all of our sites and working really hard on our assessments. Dr. Lake has done an amazing job in working with our building leadership in order to make sure that our assessments go well for students and problem solving on the sites. So we've had to do some things a little differently this year than we've done in the past. And so she did a great job with that. The schools responded well. The students have done well with that. So just celebrating all sites this month. We did have a couple walkthroughs this past month. One was at Stowe Elementary School, and when we went out to Stowe Elementary School, we really got a chance we went on kind of a special day. They were doing a lot of environmental work. They had groups from around the area coming out and sharing different things about animals and the history of that, and the kids were engaged in all sorts of activities, looking through microscopes. It was really exciting. We went around and toured different classrooms, and we saw some beaver furs and just all sorts of exciting things. So the kids were very highly engaged. That was one of the biggest takeaways, just excitement and passion around that. So always really fun to see. We also went out to Chester Creek, and we had an opportunity to work with their building administrator and tour through their site and see some of the different things that they're offering. You know, again, just high levels of student engagement going on, and staff working really hard to help kids. It was really, really exciting to see that. So those were a couple of the walkthroughs that we did in this past month. I did have a few highlights I wanted to share. First off was front office safety and security training. So back last fall, we applied for the COPS federal grant, and we received $500,000 there. And then in addition to that, we had the school safety grants that we received additional funding through the state to $150,000 plus or minus a little bit there. And so we've been really talking about how do we upgrade our front facilities. We know our community has said that we really want safe and welcoming, but there's a balance there between being welcoming and safe, and so how can we best do that? We recently had a training here in Duluth that Mr. Barsness, Ms. Canavan, and some of our clerical staff went and attended, and it had to do with front office safety and gave them best practices and how to have office safety. They're going to be giving me some feedback and working with Mr. Barsness on some protocols that we'll share with our building leadership to talk about what does it mean to have somebody come into a school. What does that look like, and how can we have safe practices at our front entry points? And so it's really exciting to get, they're really the staff on the front line with that, and so it's really good to get their input and for them to be able to share that with us. So we're excited to provide that opportunity and really excited about the feedback they'll be offering. In addition, I want to highlight the grant process again. We always want to make sure that we are in the know of grants before we accept them. So for the grant process, we have shared that out with our staff and talked about what that grant process is again, and then also just kind of highlighting that we do want to have grants before they're actually approved. So there's the month before when you apply for a grant, we'd say, hey, let us know you're applying. If there's any things in that grant that we need to be aware of. Generally, we love to get the support, and we're really excited about that, but sometimes there is something in there that we might need to have a conversation or tweak on how that would fit into our district. And so we do ask that happens, and we are currently meeting weekly. HR, finance, and my office all meet to talk through different grants that are proposed. So if a grant is being proposed, it would come to our team. We would have a chance to look at it and review that as a team. We can see if there's any issues with that, and usually through the HR, finance, and the assistant superintendent perspective, we can problem solve any of those things. We then bring those forward to the school board and say, here's some that we're recommending to say that we should go out and apply for, and then when those funds are hopefully awarded, then we would come back and say, great job, everybody. So that is the grant process, and just wanted to share a little bit on that. Supportive discipline and communities of practice. The Minnesota Department of Education has been working with a consultant firm as well as some input from the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. There's some crossover there in some of the diversion meetings we've gone to with one of the books that they're using. And really, we had a conversation with them to say, how can this help support us through our MTSS work? How can this help support us through our code of conduct and our handbook? And in entering the conversations, they said this work would really help in moving some of that forward. And so we said, okay, well, let's go check it out. So Mr. Lake and I went and attended one, and we thought, they have some good things here. And so we have brought some of that work back, actually, and Mr. Lake has been working with some of our leadership on some of the pieces of that. And we went to a second one in Sartell just last week, and we've expanded that group to include some principals who've said they're interested in MTSS I will use the word behavior, and we're still defining some of those terms, but on the behavior side of MTSS, which would also include things like social emotional learning. And then in addition to that, we've also had some of our handbook committee join us in special education to talk about how we're supporting our students. And this offers a perspective on how we can do some things and inform our MTSS work. So it's been some good learning there. We've had 2 meetings this year, and then there's an additional 5 next year. So we've sent out those dates to everybody, and so we're looking forward to include that through our MTSS work. Navy Week. So I was approached by the United States Navy, and they said that they will be coming to our school district in July, and they were looking for ways to engage with students. We don't have school in session, but in Duluth we offer so many different programs, and so we started thinking, where are our kids and what could we do? We did share this at a recent principal meeting, and our summer school staff, our summer school leadership, and then we also talked to our Key Zone folks and said these would be some great opportunities for us to get engaged. So we're going to be having a meeting with them coming up, and they do all sorts of different neat activities. It's not, their focus isn't necessarily recruitment, it's about just creating awareness in the central states, because we're a little ways away from the ocean, but we do have a really big lake. So they'll be around the community actually doing different events, but they're looking for ways to engage with kids. And so they do have a band, and so they said, if there's opportunities to work in music, they would love to partner in that, or even do some shows. They actually have some people come in that do the history of the Navy. They actually have some actual people that diffuse underwater explosive devices, and they bring in their equipment, not the devices that explode, but just their diver gear, and they talk through that process, and they shared some different things. So we're going to get together with them. We're going to talk about where could these be some natural fits, and where can we give the Navy some opportunity to work with our kids and just do some of that engagement. But a lot of excitement from both from our Key Zone staff and also from our summer school leadership. The last thing I wanted to share was about community schools. So we've been working really hard on the community school sides, and we've redesigned some of our leadership structure. We've been working on an MOU and job descriptions, and we really were kind of in a wonky place this year, where we had some staff that were hired by the collaborative, and then that same position was hired by the school district, and the supervision was going out in different ways, and it really created an interesting dynamic that in the conversations about who reports to who and what does that look like. So we are looking to take them underneath the umbrella of the school district. Those are the site coordinator positions, and so those would be district employees. And this is not these aren't new positions. They currently exist at our community school sites, which is Meyer Wilkins, Lincoln, and Denfeld. We've also brought together a leadership team. It was a piece we really felt that was missing, and so this will be site coordinators, and along with myself facilitating with the administrator from the collaborative on a monthly basis. And then every other month we're going to invite the administrators or their designee to that meeting, and in that we'll do some shared decision making. Agendas will be set based on, if the administrators are not there, what topics need to be discussed, which will be really exciting. And I currently had a chance to partner with some people from around the country on community schools and attend a leadership network, and it was really interesting to hear just some of the really exciting things that are going around the country. But what I also learned was that we're doing some really amazing things here too, and it gave me a chance to kind of not necessarily compare like we're better or not, but it's like, here's how far we've gone with the work and where are you in your work. And people were really looking to Duluth to say, wow, some of the work that you're doing is really spot on, and this is the direction we need to go. So it was also reinforcing brought back some really neat tools and stuff on how we need to look at community schools, but they really like the ideas about working with community schools and aligning to world's best workforce. They really like the idea of our leadership structure and that decision-making process and how we're kind of working to move from beyond schools, but the vision being district-wide with community schools, really focusing on that western side first to be supporting those students, but, eventually it'd be great if we continue to grow that out. So, really reinforcing great learning, and I've shared those resources with some of the folks at the collaborative and those that cross over at the district in terms of resources, and then just really reaffirming that we're doing some good things here. And I think when we talk about our graduations and what we're doing to help graduation rates, this definitely speaks to that. And we do know that community schools are effective, and there's a lot out there to support that. And if there's some stuff in the legislature right now, we're hoping to see some good stuff there too. So, lastly, shout out. So I don't have a name that I can share with this because it was anonymous, and so I have to keep it anonymous. But it was we had a family approach Piedmont Elementary School about their lunch balances and students who couldn't afford to pay lunch, and what was that balance at the school, and asking what is it that we could offer to help, and Principal Shimon has just said, anything you would be just wonderful. Like, thank you for even thinking about this. Well, they gave a very, very sizable donation to the school district to help our schools and help our kids out with that. And so I can't use the person's name, but I just still wanted to just say that, these acts of kindness that we get are just so important, so wonderful, and just wanted to say thank you. So if the family is listening, thank you very much. If not, maybe you'll catch this on a YouTube recording, but just really want to say thank you to that. It's pretty amazing. So, and thank you from the district and especially Piedmont. That is my report for the month of May. Any questions?
Chair Lafferkamp? Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing that shout out with that gift. As well as many other good shout-outs. I actually have kind of a few different questions, so just
Okay.
may I just kind of proceed through them? Okay, thank you. Around the front office safety, can you, maybe I missed it, but who are you involving from our front office staff in some of those discussions? I don't maybe need to have you mention names, but just kind of positions where they're from.
So we asked for the front office clerical staff from 2 elementaries, middle and high school. We also asked someone from the district office to attend. So we wanted to try to get a good representation of the district. We worked with their union leadership to offer some names and who might be some good people. We also asked our principals to offer input on anybody that they thought would be a strong fit, a recommendation, and then based off those recommendations, we came up with a group, and then they attended. I believe it was a week ago, Monday.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad it was spread throughout the district, and that you worked with the union leadership on that. Okay, my second question. Thank you for the update on the grant process. Not sure if it would be helpful for board members to have that information, just for background being we've been concerned sometimes about approving grants kind of because of that process. It might be just helpful for our own learning on that. And then I just wanted to jump to the item about the Navy Week. And I want to preface this by saying I'm very supportive of us bringing military services to our schools as an alternative or as another option for kids. And I come from a family of military. My sister was in the Navy for 29 years and brother for 20 years in the Marines. So I support all of that. And they went right from high school because that was what made sense for them. I do have some concerns, though, about what kinds of activities that they might be doing, if they're going to be doing any direct recruitment. I know a few years ago the PTSA Council worked on an issue with making sure parents knew they could opt out of receiving information, and there were some issues around names being given. And so I guess I'm just curious, as you're starting to explore this, I'm a little concerned and curious, I guess, where this could go.
I can give you a little more information on that, and maybe this will be helpful. I asked them specifically about recruitment, and that was something I had asked about directly. So is the goal recruitment? They said no. They said it's awareness, and they said that they feel that there's a difference to that they're not actively recruiting. It's just supposed to be that there's an awareness, and it's supposed to be community-wide, but yes, they are looking to connect with kids of all ages. The presentations they do they could be anywhere from 1 to 4 hours in total. 1 to 2 they said is usually best. Some different things that they do are bomb tech divers, which is that was where the example came earlier with the divers and bomb technicians come and they talk about how to defuse bombs in war zones, and they bring their tools and their robots and bring their suits and the different tools that they use. Another one is the Constitution group, which really focuses on the history of the Navy. So it has a little bit of a historical focus. They bring wood from the ship and they practice how to do knot tying. They show up in their 1813 uniforms. And these are generally active servicemen who have been in there for about 2 to 3 years out post high school. So they're 20, 21-ish. Another one is the Naval History and Heritage Command, and they talk about Minnesota history, and so they focus on Navy as historically in Minnesota. There was also a post-secondary piece. They had not confirmed, but they were looking at the U.S. Naval Academy and people that are there. There was nothing confirmed about that. That was just a brainstorm they'd had at the time. Their band, they were very passionate about the band that they have. And their director was actually in the meeting that I had, and they were looking to either do some performances for sites or partnering with our existing music programs if they want to play some songs together. Also just connecting with kids, going out as part of our Key Zone program and playing a little soccer, or just getting involved in some indoor activities were some things that they were looking to do. They said their big thing is they really wanted to just connect with kids and just create an awareness of the Navy. That was pretty much the feedback. I don't know if that raises additional questions or.
It actually does, okay. But I think I'll let some other board members respond and keep thinking about this.
Okay.
My other question on an item you brought up was just with the community schools. Thank you for the update. I appreciate hearing about this leadership team, and I was just curious, what are you hoping is the outcome of that leadership team? Just, you kind of touched on kind of shared decision making, and I'm glad you're bringing it together. I just kind of want to understand it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was going to bring up my document, but it's taking me a second here. So the way that we looked at this is we really want to think about creating systems and structures and building capacity within organizations. Any decision should not be about an individual, it should be about the institution. And so when we see things that are led by a single person, they live and die by that person. And when they shift or move, then it creates all sorts of whatever. So how could we do that? And so we were taking a look at the collaborative, and we wanted to say, instead of functioning as 3 independent sites, how are we looking at this as a district? There has to be balance between things being individualized at the site, which is extremely important, but also there's also those uniform things and how we're doing things that is important. So the way that this looks is we have the actual site teams, which would be the very heavy community involvement, made up of mostly community members, or at least the majority community members. We want to establish those things, both because it's a best practice, and also there's some funding implications too in the legislature right now if we have those in place. Those would connect to the building leadership teams, which we have said that we want our site coordinators to be a part of. We think that community schools is an integral part of what we do, so we wanted to systematize their role in that process. And our building leadership teams are really already doing that to a large degree, but we wanted to make sure we captured that through our MOU. From there, we want information to flow to the respective organizations, because we have the collaborative, which is not associated with the school directly. They're not under the umbrella of the school anyway, and then we have our school district, and we have to make sure we're working in collaboration. So things like we talked about grant review process or MOUs, those are things that would come to that team. And so actually just before this, and this is an expansion of that grant review team, is that we've just decided today that we're going to bring not only grants but MOUs to the team, which is Kathy and Peggy, Tim, Michelle, and myself, to review all MOUs as well as grants that are coming into the district. And so we can make sure that they're working in collaboration with our resources, that we're using our resources as efficiently as we can. And then when we think about a continuum of services, how does this fit? One of the MOUs we were just discussing today had to do with social emotional learning, and so we're like, okay, so how does this fit within other resources we have, and is this taking the place of an existing resource, or how should that shift and look? And so those are good conversations. And then so from that team right there, then they would go to our respective boards. So if there was policy decisions that need to be made at our side, then I would take those forward through our leadership team, through board leadership, and to the school board. Same thing would happen on the collaborative side. So those are some things that they would work on. As we're talking about collecting data and really aligning to world's best workforce. That's great that we're getting all these resources, but how are we impacting student achievement? How are we moving the needle? And so we should be measuring that and taking a look at that. And if we're not doing a good job, then we should probably have a conversation and say, what maybe needs to be changed? Have we not coached staff well enough? Is this the proper way to do this? How might we else do this? And so that leadership team would really do that. And as we bring on a new person from the collaborative, or whoever it might be, a new site coordinator, they have a team to wrap around them and support them to know that, hey, I have this network on how things can look, and I have people I can collaborate with. So there's a lot of inner learning there between the group as well. So those are some of the things that group would work on.
Thank you. I'm done now. I just thank you for some of the different ways that you've been reaching out to different staff people and really building some coalitions on some of these different topics. So thank you.
I just have a comment about the Navy Week. I do remember when they were here before, which was quite a while ago, and it was a pretty successful event. What I'm really hoping to hear a message of, if we collaborate with them in any aspect, is the message of them providing community service to Duluth. And in that aspect, I think we can avoid the recruitment talk if we're focused on their providing, community engagement and services. And I really do hope that our message back to them is that we support them, and it's a distinguished thing to do, because I think many of our military service families in the area don't always feel supported, and so however we can support them and teach our kids that supporting them is the right thing to do, I think that's fair. My one question I did have about community schools is, now that you're reorganizing the leadership team, is it possible to put a board representative on that leadership team so that the board is more engaged in what the community school is doing, considering we're going to now have, a number of district employees on there?
The way that it works right now is I serve on the collaborative board, so we do have that connection, and we actually did make sure that we established that to be a set practice. It requires my position to pay attention to and be invested in community schools. In terms of us having a board member on there, I guess I would look to the board to let me know if they feel like that would be a good thing, and then we'll move forward. And
is there a plan in place for now that the board Community School Board President Bernie Burnham is moving on. Will there be a replacement, or is the redesigned structure not including a leadership position like that?
Yeah, Bernie's pretty amazing. I don't know if we could ever quite replace Bernie, but we do have had conversations about who would be taking on that role. So yeah, there will be a new person that will take over for her. Absolutely.
Right. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Do we have a policy about military on campuses? What they can do? I mean, I get recruitment versus awareness. I find that a kind of it's how you interpret it. I mean, it's obviously recruitment in the long run, which is fine, but that's not my question. I just wondered if we had a policy in any way.
Not to my knowledge, but we have had several meetings with all branches of the military and worked to define what their visits look like in our sites, how often, and what the expectations are. I know that we've had some special events in the past before, so this is kind of outside our kind of our usual agreed upon what those visits look like, because it is a special event in the summer.
All right. If there's no other questions.
Nope.
Oh, go ahead.
Yep. Yeah, and just on that note, again, to be clear, I very much support our partnership in some way with the Navy. I just want to make sure that we're not starting precedents as well. I mean, there could be lots of groups that would want to come and work with our school district in different ways. So the other question I had, though, in terms of the community schools, don't they have their own bylaws in terms of who serves on their board? So when you reference board, I mean, you need to check with them on what their bylaws say about who can serve on their board, right?
Yep, that is correct. So,
Okay.
and that's part of the importance of that leadership team is so, and part of the reason that's important for me to be a part of that, or my position to be a part of that, is so there's an understanding of the different bylaws. And so, as we have two different organizations with their own set of bylaws, we find ways to make that work. And when we hit a rub, that we can problem solve that and move forward with what's best for kids. So, yeah.
Okay. And I just want to say welcome that side of the table that have arrived since the beginning of the superintendent's report, Member Sandsted, Member Gorham, and Member Kirby. And we'll move, thank you, Assistant Superintendent. Now we'll move on to Director of Curriculum, Ms. Netland.
Thank you. For my report, I wanted to start with professional development. So planning is well underway for our August Staff Development Day, August 27th. Had several meetings, both with the entire large group, and then broke into subgroups, certified and non-certified, just because some of the needs are so different. So what we're looking at for next year is a little bit more flexibility on this day versus last year. Everybody had the same experience that day. And so moving forward for next year, we're going to have some common experiences set across groups, and then the remainder of the day will be tailored based more on need with position. So for example, our certified staff will be spending time with their building leaders in their buildings, focused on their continuous improvement plan efforts around reading, math, social emotional learning, behavior, that type of learning. Non-certified staff will be focused on department or job duty specific training. But the core morning part of the day, everyone will get ALICE as something that's across work group. And also everyone will get an hour of a warm and welcoming professional development training, which is yet to be determined what specifically that is yet, but that was a clear need across work groups that rose to the surface as we talked. So those are kind of what I know so far from that. We have another meeting actually tomorrow to continue working on fleshing that out. Then something I put into place this year kind of as a trial was I held a retreat for the curriculum department staff, and I wasn't sure how it was going to go exactly. I pulled everyone for a day and to focus just on a couple of common things that came out as priorities within the group. And so we weren't worried about our other positions or duties or hats that we wore. We just focused on this and troubleshooting, and focused too on doing some community building within the group, since a lot of us end up functioning like silos just as part of a daily job duty. So we were doing some team building, some troubleshooting, and lots of neat connections came out of that. And just looking at initial feedback, it looks like we're definitely interested in continuing that practice. So that was exciting step. Also with that, one of the fun things was it ended up not costing a lot. When we talk about efficient use of resources, it basically was a couple of subs, and otherwise people were able to flex time or readjust, and Fond du Lac Community College was nice enough to host us for free. So it was wonderful to be able to get away in the woods and not have to pay anything for it. So thank you to them. Another piece that also happened last week actually was did the same practice with the immersion program, both Ojibwe and Spanish. And so tried to get away and focus just on immersion for a day and work through getting some documents in place, working through troubleshooting just roles and responsibilities, space, all kinds of different things related particularly to immersion. So those are kind of some professional development things that have happened recently. And then as far as curriculum, I've got an 8th grade math pilot update that you will see just after I've finished talking here. My math specialist, Patty Bamanek, and I believe a couple of teachers have joined to share the updates regarding our 8th grade math pilot. And I am very excited to share this with you. I know they will be able to speak to it better than I can, but one of the things you will be seeing as a teaser is support from teachers who have been implementing something new and students' experiences of that and how they have viewed that as valuable or not. And so I think you're going to be really impressed with some of the work that's been going on in 8th grade math. And then also we'll have a music instrument rental. There was a recommendation for a fee increase. And so when I was reviewing the policy, I actually ended up calling MSBA, and I've got some recommended revisions to that, and we can go over that more in depth when that policy comes up later. But just as a heads up for that, I'll be providing a little more background on why I made those revisions. So that's my report.
I'm wondering if we, in terms of staff development, I assume that there's some more sort of big picture planning that you have, and I'm wondering where the like trauma-informed teaching fits into that. How often we do that, who we're doing that with, if we have any plans for August. If you could just speak to that.
Sure. So that actually came up as one of the possible topics for all staff to receive training on, and as the conversation evolved, it really came down to focusing on something that was urgent and relevant for all work groups, and we settled on thinking about a continuum of understanding from anti-racist and being aware of your own biases training, interacting professionally, understanding the impact of trauma or ACEs on students and staff. We kind of talked through a whole host of that and landed on the idea of a warm and welcoming environment to start. So as there are pieces, to answer your question, there's nothing specifically planned regards trauma-informed district-wide. I know some specific buildings have already made plans to incorporate that based on their needs assessment, but as far as everybody getting it, that wasn't the thing that we landed on for this time. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Just as part of this discussion, I did want to mention that a couple weeks ago, I know about 20 at least of our district staff were involved with the early childhood day-long training, which the speaker, who I know you've heard people say, can we bring this guy in because he was really great, was around trauma-informed classrooms and that whole topic. And then there was a coalition of people that are working right now to do more ACEs training, and they did a number of them from January to June, and I know they're continuing to meet to plan other opportunities as well, and many of our district staff are involved with that as well. So I guess I just kind of throw that out for discussion. I was at that day-long training, and it was the speaker was really great, so I know you've been maybe hearing that from other people. Yeah, thank you.
All right, if there are no other questions, thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess we will call the 8th grade math pilot update crew up to the table. If you need extra chairs, just grab one on your way, I guess. I'm not sure. welcome, welcome, welcome. With Director Netland's teaser to your update now, I'm kind of excited to hear. Would you like us to introduce ourselves, or are you guys okay with us?
I'd like you. Oh. Yes, please.
All right, I will start. I am School Board Member Alana Oswald.
Jeff Horton, Assistant Superintendent.
Gail Netland, Director of Curriculum.
Pam Nelson, math teacher at Ordine East.
Jane Jutine, 8th grade math teacher at Ordine East.
Patty Bamanek, math specialist for the district.
I'm Nora Sandstead, School Board Member.
I'm Josh Gorham, School Board Member.
David Kirby, School Board.
Bill Gronseth, Superintendent.
Rosie Leffler-Kemp, School Board.
All right, thank you very much. Take it away.
All right. Is it on? Yes. Okay. All right. I'm going to try and not talk a ton. That's really going to be hard because I'm very excited about this. Right now, I just want you to imagine what your mathematics classroom looked like, whether you were sitting in middle school or high school. And I can make some predictions about what it looked like. I won't ask you how it went. I think we know. No, just kidding. I want to contrast that with what we know about what best practice is and what classrooms should look like. I don't want to read the slides to you, but there's a shift from when we learned mathematics, it was about learning procedures first and then maybe applying them later. We know that that's not how the brain functions, and it's much better to learn the conceptual understanding at the same time that we're learning procedures. Communicating is hugely important. Learning is a social construct. We learn in groups. And that's been a shift over the course of my career. So communication is very important. I didn't have a whole lot of communication going on when I was sitting in my geometry class. The teacher talked at us. Feedback, and I think this is the interesting one, on mistakes. I still hear teachers say, I'm not going to call up a student that's going to make a mistake, which is unfortunate because of the best conversations I ever had in my classroom were the errors that students made. They figured out where the student went wrong. They came up with ideas of how to get the student back on the right track. They were the deepest conversations we ever had, and they were a lot of fun, and the use of technology is important as well. So what we're asking teachers to do is shift practice. That's not easy. I think of teaching as a cultural thing. We sat in a classroom for 13 years being taught by someone who stood in the front of the classroom, and it was the idea that if we just listened to someone else, we would gain their knowledge and expertise. So we're asking teachers to get away from being the person in front of the room and asking kids to do mathematics. And mathematics is not a procedure. We need procedures, that's important. But if you look on the left-hand side, there are the teaching practices. We know about how important it is to set goals. We know it's extremely important to do authentic problem solving. And even the word problems in a math textbook are not problem solving. Very important to use the different kinds of representations when you're talking about solving problems in mathematics, whether it's graphs, equations, tables, etc. Discourse, I can't emphasize enough how important it is that that teachers facilitate the kind of discourse that they can listen to their students, but also get students to talk to one another about how they're thinking, which requires posing purposeful questions. I've talked about the conceptual understanding. Productive struggle, I don't know about you, but in the United States, we're very uncomfortable whenever a student is struggling, so we want to rush in and fix it for them. We know the latest research out of Dweck and Joe Bowler would say, if you don't struggle, you're not learning. And they have the mapping of the brain to actually show how those connections are made when you make mistakes and when you struggle. And then the importance of looking at student thinking. If you look on the student side, again, you can see the connections between persevering in solving problems and critiquing arguments of others, listening to each other, modeling, using tools appropriately, etc. So why change? It doesn't matter where you're sitting in the United States, the scores are flat for high school. When we changed our standards several years ago, and even went to Common Core, different states, we've seen a growth in K through 8, and high school remains flat. So we have a huge need to make some changes in the high school, but the success in high school is pivotal on what happens in 8th grade mathematics. That's the beginning of your study of algebra. And what we wanted to do is make sure that students were more engaged in learning. And as I said before, if we want teachers to change, we must support them with professional development and coaching, if possible. And so this particular program that we landed on to pilot, and this started a few years back, it's a non-profit corporation. It was written by mathematics teachers out of California in conjunction with Joe Bowler at Stanford. And because they're nonprofit, they can offer 8 days of professional development. I've been in this business for a long time, and I will tell you I've never found a math program that offers 8 days of professional development. They're shaking their heads yes. I think they would concur with me. So just real quickly, we started out trying to increase scores in intermediate algebra by doing several things. We tried to teach that course over 2 years, not very successfully. We tried to do labs with that, and the best success we had was when we had 7-period days, and if the lab teacher was also teaching core, but we've changed our structures, and that's difficult to do. The short end of this is that we started the materials and interventions at the high school and also middle school to support those kids that were having the greatest amount of struggle. And what happened is that there was so much excitement at the middle school from the teachers and conversations with the principals and Gail. They were really asking to move this into the core curriculum. And since it was based on best practices and it's engaging for kids, this year we moved it into 8th graders that were taking Algebra 1, not intermediate algebra. And so that's how the pilot got expanded. So in terms of evaluating where this is at, we asked teachers and principals, on your experience this year, would you recommend it again? And then we asked kids, which I think is one of the most interesting things that we did. When we asked the teachers of the principals, and I think we're missing one response because there's 4 middle school math teachers involved, 2 at each site, and the principals, and the question was, should we continue, was an emphatic yes for next year, not making an assumption that they'd want to continue to do this. So these were some of the statements that came up from the teachers themselves, and you're going to see words that keep coming up, students being engaged. And we've been talking for a long time about the importance of getting students engaged in their learning. Talking about students talking to one another is also in there. The idea of mixed practice and also actually space practice, which is very important. But then we asked the kiddos about their idea of what the math was like. In my 40-plus years in education, I've never had students that want to go to the school board before and demand a set of materials. That's never happened. But statements like the kids are saying that they like it, they're saying that it helps them remember things, and that's part of that space practice piece that we know from research is important to move it into long-term memory. They can visualize the problems. We make the mistake of wanting to get the kids to abstract way too soon. And what we know is if they can see the mathematics, whether it's through a diagram or manipulatives, that they understand what's actually happening with the mathematics and they're more likely to remember it. But you can see the comments, they're learning more, they think it's fun, it's challenging, it's not that it's easier. They're working in groups, so they have opportunities to talk to one another. Gets into my brain, I think that's kind of funny, compared to last year, and I think what they're saying is that they're remembering things. It's been the best math class I have ever had. Not everything was perfect, but if you look at these, I think there's a link in the thing. There are some kids that would prefer not to work in groups. So it's not 100% perfect, but what we do know is if they're planning on getting a job, they have to learn how to collaborate. I'd like more work time alone, which were some things, just to make sure that we covered both ends of the spectrum. So then I kind of looked at the preliminary MCA data. What I want you to know, the practice that we do is we pull off the top students and put them in intermediate algebra, which is our first high school course. There's a lot of research on tracking, and when I look at the data, we have tracked our students of color right out of ever accessing our calculus class because we start that in 8th grade. San Francisco had a similar problem, and they decided to go after closing their achievement gap. They moved their first high school math course into high school, so no student was taking a high school course until they got to high school. And they started out with 50% students failing prior to that, to on single digits now, and they've been doing this for a number of years. They head-on went after how even setting up kids to go into another class is the message to kids you can't do math. And we're trying to undo that because all students can do math. Maybe not at the same level, but if you listen to Joe Bowler, there isn't any reason that we can't get all students, with the exception of a few DCD kids, to have do math at very high levels. Anyway, so if you look at the results from Ordine, we see that we have some kids exceeding because the kids that were pulled off the top are in the high class. So I want you to remember that as you're looking at this and not going, well, we don't have anybody exceeding. It's because, and I believe there were 5 classes of intermediate algebra pulled out of, it's over.
It's about half of it.
It's about half of the kiddos. And I think when we changed from students being able to go into any class and select, that we were thinking that would be a good way for students of color to have access to that. But what we're finding out is more students that are not of color are going into that class. They're selecting. And if you think about it, part of that is because their advocates are their parents. And children of white parents are probably more prone to get their students into the faster track to get their kids to calculus. I could go on and on about that. Not all of our kids that go into the advanced math class get to calculus, just to let you know that as well. But what we're seeing is even though we don't have all the SCs and the meets that we want, that we do have some high growth and medium growth going on at our Eastern school. And then in our Western school, this is difficult to look at because we have a lot of kids struggling in our Western school, a lot of students not meeting. But then if you look at the growth, we start to see we're making some changes in terms of both medium and high growth for those kids. If you look at the bars comparing the does not meet kids, pretty significant bar for that. I'm sorry about that. Exit, I don't want to do that either, go away. The does not meet category is of concern. That's not what we want to see, but we're also seeing some growth in the medium and the high that shows that even though we don't want them where we want them to be, that there's movement. So as part of this...
Can I make one comment about
yeah.
the Also, the problem with comparing this data, I also teach 7th grade. Oh, sorry. I also teach 7th grade, and overall 7th grade scores went down because it's the first year we had them testing for 3 hours straight instead of 1 hour for 4 days. And so in 7th grade, we felt the scores went down because of that testing. So the fact that 8th grade scores actually had that kind of growth in comparison is really significant.
So in summary, we're excited about how well it's going. I think the teachers have really enjoyed the professional development. They've enjoyed the times to collaborate with their peers because we have 4 days in the summer and then 4 days over the course of the school year. And I think this is not easy to implement a brand new curriculum that totally turns your teaching upside down. This is not easy work. and I'm very proud of what the middle school teachers have attained, and I'm very excited for the fact that we have high school teachers that are willing to get trained this summer to bring it into the high school as well for our first high school course, intermediate algebra. And as I said again, never have I heard kids so excited about a set of materials before. So, questions? Do you guys want to say something in addition? Because these are the folks on the front line.
Sure. Teaching 5 classes. So because of how things worked out this year, I ended up getting only 1 prep, so I teach the same class 5 times in a day, which if I had been teaching how I had before, I would have been like, by the middle of the day, I'd have been like, okay, I can't do this anymore. But because each class is so different, and I'm not the one standing in front doing the talking, the kids are talking to each other, my day just flies by. So, is that what you were? Yeah.
I have a question about, so the self-selection into classes. Is 8th grade the first time that students are choosing their math classes? Okay, yes. And do we separate kids by ability prior to that at all? Or are all the 4th graders in sort of the same equivalent class? All the 6th graders are in the same math class? Or do we divide them up?
So by policy, we have eliminated tracking up until 8th grade.
Okay.
There are some pockets where teachers are putting students into the next course, but that's not the direction that we want them to go. We'd like them to be able to go deeper in the mathematics with their kids. Mm-hmm. But we have had Advanced 6 before and Advanced 7. So in the last decade or so, we have eliminated those classes.
Okay. And so kids get to self-select in 8th grade with the parents' assistance, and we end up with some more profound segregation, it sounds like, when they're self-selecting.
Yes.
Okay. And then that process continues through high school, self-selection. Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm gonna follow up on what Member Sandstead was asking, in that in the self-selection that they have been able to do, in order to get to calculus, you have to take the advanced 8th grade, whatever it is. So there's not a possibility of ever advancing the math ability to calculus for the kids of color that don't self-select into the higher math at 8th grade.
Is that a question?
I'm leading to my question. So how do you propose kids get to calculus if we move that self-selection to 9th grade? Because the current track we have wouldn't allow, our current track would only take them to pre-calc. So where along, how would you propose changing the track of math and what we teach? So there's calculus in the end for those that desire it.
Yep. We are not going to move away from students wanting calculus and or parents wanting their students to have calculus. What San Francisco did is the tracking does not begin until after sophomore year. So all students are in a heterogeneous class until after sophomore year, which is their geometry class. And then after that, what they do is they compact Algebra 2 and pre-calc in 1 year. And there's a lot of review, and I've talked to high school teachers that said that's doable. And then they get to calc the following year. So it's not that someone hasn't figured out how to do that, but if you were to go and look at the San Francisco website and see what they've done with successive students, more students of color completing more math courses and higher math courses, it's just, it's amazing. And part of it is thinking about what we believe is smart in mathematics. You know, in an elementary school, it's if they can do their flashcards, those are the smarter kids. That's not true. It's the kids that can do the problem solving and explain their thinking to other kids. but that doesn't necessarily show up unless you're doing problem solving in your classroom. So there are districts and places that have taken this on head on because when I started this job, there was not one student of color with the exception of, this can make me cry again, with the exception of an Asian in calculus. And we've made some improvements, but not nearly enough. So when we look at our disaggregated data, it's rough.
And so how does this curriculum tackle those Lincoln Park stats that have such a wide gap established already by the time they get to 8th grade? Does this curriculum offer things in 7th or 6th grade to help get people to a certain standard?
I think the biggest thing that has to change about what we think math is. When we think math is procedures and that we teach them and it's something that we teach, mathematics is linear and we teach this in 3rd grade and this in 4th grade, then it becomes difficult because you have students that don't have the foundation to be taught an algorithm. Mathematics is not procedures. It's about thinking. And one of the things that the set of materials do, and there are other examples of these kinds of materials, is it gives them a task that's low floor, high ceiling. And what that means is it's a contextual problem that they might see in real life, and they can access it in a way that makes sense for them. And what you'll see is the variety of responses along a continuum of efficiency. So the teacher's job then becomes to move them along that contingency. An example I had when I was in the classroom, 6th grade, doing fractions, addition of fractions. I had a student who was functioning at the 2nd grade level. He could delve into addition of fractions because he could draw measuring cups. Is that efficient? No, but he had access to the mathematics. And what we're learning is, in order for students to progress, they have to have access to grade level mathematics. So when we start doing the tracking, oftentimes if we put them into interventions, they may or may not have access to grade level mathematics. And that's the wrong way to go about it. But it's a shift in what we think mathematics is, and it's a shift in listening to kids explain. And you will see that, you guys could probably talk about, because you have heterogeneous groups, even though some of the kids are pulled out. Are you seeing more conversations going on and better thinking, or what are you seeing in your classrooms?
Both of our rooms are set up so that the students are sitting in teams of 3 or 4. And my largest class, I have 8 teams that I'm kind of walking around monitoring. But during the time that they're working on a problem, I'm walking around and listening, and I'm not intervening unless they ask for my help. And even when they ask for our help, we usually redirect it back with another question. And so they're kind of made to, there's really no choice. If you're going to solve the problem, you have to talk to each other about it. And it's been really cool listening to them this year work through and talk about the math that they're doing.
Well, and the other piece is this has the mixed practice. And so our kids that are kind of chronically truant, I don't ever have to say, okay, you've got these 10 assignments you have to do, because today's assignment is going to have questions from all of those weeks. And so they never feel like they're in a hole that they're never going to dig themselves out of. And because of all the talking, they can sit down with the team and the conversation catches them up really quickly versus, you've missed this whole topic. They haven't missed, it'll catch them up naturally. So students who are gone come back in and fit right back in. It's not like they feel like I'm no longer a part of the class. So it is really significant for our kids who have truancy issues.
Member Gorham?
This is really interesting to listen to ahead of a conversation about graduation rates. What I feel like I hear you saying is you've changed the system of teaching mathematics in a way that I feel like you're saying opens the door to more students' approaches to looking at information and utilizing their unique skill set and perspective to attain the skill in their own way. And I think that's fascinating. I think that speaks to an important systems change. And I guess my question is, this is particular to math, it's a pilot. What might we learn about this as it applies to other subject areas and the ultimate topic of graduation rates, equity, and ultimately the best opportunity to have the best opportunities going forward for all of our students?
How much time do I have? So to answer your question, because I thought long and hard about this, there's nothing going on in this pilot that couldn't be used in other courses. In fact, part of the materials are based on something called complex instruction, which gets at the use of collaborative groups, not cooperative, because in cooperative groups, we've all had our own kids in those kinds of groups where the more invested student, I'll say, takes over the work and does the work while the other ones sit back. There are particular teacher moves that teachers learn to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen and that they're all accountable for one another. That's a shift in and of itself. There are some other components of the complex instruction. It's about doing rich tasks, and you could do interesting things no matter what course you're in. I know that because they're a nonprofit, I know they go out and teach complex instruction to multiple core areas. So there needs to be a shift in instruction, and it could happen anywhere. And it would be much more engaging for students, if that answers your question. Gets me very excited, because if you sit and you follow a student and you do what they do and sit in rows of desks and listen to people primarily lecture, and you do that for 6 hours a day, that's tough. So.
Members Hanson.
This is really fascinating and exciting. So we had the pilot with some 8th graders this year. Next year, it's going to expand to some 9th graders. Is that? And do we have? Is there any? What's the long-term plan look like? What does this look like over the next 5 years, ideally?
I'll answer that one. So this is happening outside of our larger curriculum adoption process, and one of the things as we are learning and excited to implement this is we want to make sure that we're clear that we're not circumventing that process. And so what we're doing is inviting other people as the opportunity arises here, specifically with this cohort of students that have now had the opportunity to learn in this way and are excited and are engaged. We want to continue that, but we can't continue it unless we have people that are trained and ready, right? And so the way that we are looking to expand is offering the opportunity to the next group of teachers and looking for volunteers. And so as Patty alluded to earlier, we have some teachers who have stepped forward saying, I'm willing to be trained, I want to learn, I'm willing to give this a try. And so we're looking for people to self-select into this as we grow our understanding as a group on what does best practice truly look like in our classrooms.
So to follow up on that, you can go ahead.
Well, just one side note, because 9th grade has been an issue with the number of kids taking classes online and dropping out and ending up in ALC because of math. I don't know if you know, math is kind of the gatekeeper in terms of justice and equity, and the NCTM and MCTM, which are the National Councils of Teachers of Mathematics, justice has been their theme for the last 2 years, because without mathematics, jobs and that kind of thing, graduation rates, math is just that, those who can and those who can't. So it's really significant that this 8th grade to 9th grade transition is a positive one.
So my follow-up question is, as it moves to 9th grade, will new students be able to self-select to take this class, or is it only the kids that participated in 8th grade?
That is a great question. I would need to connect with the high school principals on that one. Our main goal in this pilot, as far as cohort, was ensuring that the students who have had the opportunity to learn in this way have access to it first.
Okay. Okay.
Because it is a large change in practice, not just for students, but also, I'm sorry, not just for staff, but also for students.
Mm-hmm. I would like to ask the teachers that are here their viewpoint. Do you feel that kids should be able to, in ninth grade, self-select into this class without an issue?
Well, I think because it'll be intermediate algebra, so the students that are taking Algebra 1 with us this year and have completed the course successfully, which is almost all of them, will be taking intermediate algebra next year, which will be the class that'll be offered. So students that didn't pass intermediate algebra this year that have to retake it will be taking it as part of, from the CPM curriculum.
And if they come from another school, it's not, I mean, it's a different learning style, but kids naturally want to be in groups and naturally want to be talking to each other. So I don't see any issue with a student from another school taking CPM.
Yeah. And we've had students move in during the school year, and it's, once they learn a couple names, they're right in there, and teammates are willing to help them get caught up. And it's all standards based, so it's following what they've learned if they've come from other Minnesota schools.
And just to clarify when I was answering your questions, so one of the reasons we had the pilot at the core level in the fall was then we could move as a group. We had intervention pieces happening, and it's creating confusion. It's creating more complicated scheduling if we want to keep kids together. So the idea is they could move together as a group.
Okay. Anyone else? Any last words? Please request anything.
I just want to thank you for your time. I'm really proud of the work these teachers have done, and I'm really excited for the experiences these kids are getting. So thank you.
And you could talk to any of our students or parents of our students, because we do have phenomenal support from all of them. They said, if we need to sign a petition, if we need to write letters, I do have a few letters saying they really wanted this curriculum, which, as Patty said, for 13-year-olds to actually care about their math class makes me cry.
Thank you very much for coming. And I hope I can ask that the current PowerPoint that they presented be uploaded to Board Book, because thank you very much. All right, our last informational presentation we've been waiting for. Welcome, Tanya Lake, to tell us about graduation rates. I think I saw 210 or something up in the corner. Sorry, I was remiss in inviting the District Advisory Committee members up too. Welcome Edie Howes and Ron Lake and the newest issue of the Duluthian Star, Brad Weiss. It's a very nice picture, I saw it. So. And Jason Grant, welcome to the table. All right, take it away.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. So, in an effort to support our World's Best Workforce Plan, we thought it would be great to go through our World's Best Workforce Plan with you. And by saying that, what I mean is that over the course of the next 5 board meetings, we want to focus in on an area of World's Best Workforce. Being that the graduation rates were just released, we wanted to start with graduation rates. And so, Dr. Lake is going to take us through some of the data And then in addition to that, we want to highlight some of the programming that we are also doing throughout our district to support graduation rates, some of which you had an opportunity already to see tonight. So Dr. Lake, would you like to take us through the data?
Okay, yes, I'd love to. Before we get started, just wanted to review what our definition of graduation rate is in this presentation. All of the numbers I'll be talking about tonight are with regard to the four-year grad rate, unless I specify otherwise. When we're looking at graduation rates, the state expects students to graduate based on a cohort model. So students who started in our district in grade 9, that number of students is what we would expect to have by their senior year graduating in 4 years. The way that they figure it out also is that students who are in 9th grade, or in that 9th grade to 12th grade period, students who move away, that number is taken out of the denominator, or the number of students that we would expect, and then when we get transfers in, then they're added to that denominator, or that expectation for that cohort. So the first slide that we're looking at is just the trends over time for all students looking at graduation rates. You can see that we've had a slight increase over since 2015-16. Overall, they're pretty stable. The next slide takes a look at our graduation rates by student ethnic group. The couple things that I want to point out with this is that our goal is the same as our state's goal, which is that we would have all students graduate that particular group, that we'd have 90% of our students in that group graduating, and that for individual students groups, the goal is 85%. Of course, we're always shooting for all of our students to graduate, but that's the target that our state has set in both of those areas for us to aim for. A couple things, looking at the individual groups, you can see that we had a significant increase in the number and percentage of our black students who have graduated. We've also seen an increase with our all-student group, as I had mentioned earlier. There also is a decline that you can see that stands out for our American Indian students, and especially. If we look at our special population, so our students who qualify for special education services, our students who qualify for free or reduced price lunch, and our students who are homeless, you can see that we've been seeing an upward trend in that data in our special populations. We like to also look at gender to just see if there are differences between our male and female students. So you can see there is a gap between our male and female students. When we're talking about that four-year graduation rate, another thing that we like to do is take a look at if they didn't graduate in 4 years, what happened? So there are different codes that our students get at the end of their senior year, and you can see that the first is graduation, obviously. 78% of our students did in fact graduate. Of the students who didn't graduate, approximately 10% were continuing their schooling. We also have 5.58% that we don't know where they went. They left our district. We don't know if they dropped out or not. We don't know if they went on to graduate in another state. We just don't know. We weren't able to track down records. And then our percentage of dropouts is at 6%. Those are students that we have verified that have dropped out of our system. One of the things that tells a little bit of a better story is looking at our cohorts over time. So this is the same group of students each year, starting in 2011, 2012. So if we were just to look across that particular cohort, you can see that at that time, 76% of our students graduated in 4 years. That same group, if we look at that same group of students or that same cohort, we added another couple percentage points for students who graduated in 5 years. By 6 years, we had 80% of our students graduating, and by 7 years, we had 82%. So when we look at our 2017-18 data, we know that 78% of our students within that cohort graduated on time. We're hopeful that we will next year have numbers that show that more students than in 5 years we were able to capture them in graduation. So you can see that the data is incomplete because we have to play that out over time. But it is important to look at that, because just because they didn't graduate in 4 years doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't graduate. Another thing to point out is the state has recognized 7-year graduation rates, which is important for us because we're a district that has a high percentage of special education students. We have approximately 18% of our population who qualify for special education services, and some students within their individual education plan have a 7-year graduation plan. That's what they need. So we do have programming that goes through that age 21, and it's nice to see that students that we have in that group do graduate in that 7-year period. The last piece is just so that you have the numbers. I'll just walk you through what the appendices show. This is just looking at our district's graduation rates as well as our sites' graduation rates, sites that are large enough to report it, and then also our state. The next one is looking at our district. You already saw these numbers on the charts previously, but here are the numbers that go along with it if you'd like to take a look at those over time for our student groups. The next is student groups for each of our high schools that are large enough to report. And then I just wanted to highlight, I also did cohorts tracked over time for our largest schools. So you can see Denfeld High School, for example, starting back in 2011-12, they had a graduation rate of 84%. By the time 7 years rolled around, nearly 89% of the students in that cohort had graduated. But you can see year by year how that cohort did. This is for East. And then oftentimes, it's good to keep in mind how large our student groups are when we're looking at some of the student groups that seem to wildly increase one year and wildly decrease another. A big part of that is just looking at some of our student groups are very small. So even if you have a difference of one student graduating, one more, it might increase your graduation rate significantly. You might have two that didn't. That may have a large drop. It could be 20, 30 percentage points, depending on the size of that student group. So this shows how many students were in that group overall in the denominator, and then in the numerator, that's the students that actually did graduate. So that's actual number of students for your information.
Okay, so next I'm going to cast, I don't know, can I cast over your presentation? I don't know how that works exactly. We'll find out.
Tyler's got to bump out.
You have to bump out, okay. Okay. Cast. And then... I think so. There it is. All right. So to follow up this conversation, we wanted to additionally look at the different programming that we're doing around the district. So we could probably spend an hour on each of the topics, and there's things on here that we don't even have listed. So this is just to give you a brief overview of some of the different things that we're doing to support graduation rates across our district. To start with, I really want to talk about the North Star accountability system and world's best workforce. So the Every Student Succeeds Act is federal legislation which helps drive education in our state. That has since shifted. This year we've started using that. We've changed we don't use the word ESSA anymore. We use North Star Plan. And so what that means is there are 7 different areas that it focuses on. The first stage is math achievement, reading achievement, and English language proficiency. Math achievement and reading really fit into World's Best Workforce, but we've added the layer of English language proficiency in that. In stage 2, we talk about math progress, reading progress, and then graduation rates, which is 4 and 7 year. And the 7 year piece is new. And then also consistent attendance. That is another piece, and that is in stage 3 of the North Star Plan accountability system. When there's not progress being made, there's 2 levels of supports that can happen: comprehensive and targeted. Targeted is the lowest level of support, which is really what we do as a school district. We really work on this through our comprehensive needs assessment process and offer this to all sites, which is something a little bit more unique to Duluth than other districts, where we really are invested in that best practice, and so all of our sites are really getting targeted support, which is wonderful. The comprehensive support really brings in a new layer, which is the Regional Centers of Excellence, and they offer on-the-ground support. Targeted support schools can go to a Regional Center of Excellence supports, but usually they're off-site. They don't come in, are not part of their continuous improvement teams. The World's Best Workforce Plan, that looks at 5 different areas, including all children being ready for school or kindergarten readiness. Read well by 3rd grade is another piece you'll see in there. It's about reducing achievement gaps. It's about college and career readiness and graduation rates. A shift in language that we've seen is really focusing on high achievement for all. And Dr. Lake talked about the cell sizes. And while on a graph we might see big dips, and we see that with small numbers, we still don't want to discount the fact that we are trying to strive that we support every student and every child, and that is important. So the graph sometimes can be misleading because we see these big dips, but it's also important to notice that, what those numbers are doing, and that we really are focusing on all kids. So I think those are some important things when we enter the conversations and take a look at that data. We're good. So we the team here wants to talk a little bit about just some of the programs and initiatives that we're doing around supporting graduation rates. And the first one I want to highlight is our School Within a School program. So School Within a School is an extension of our ALC, our Alternative Learning Center, and we actually are doing some things a little bit different with that next year, which are kind of exciting. We're really bringing some of that ALC AEO model out to our sites, and so we're working with our secondaries right now and defining exactly what that is. But this is a place where we can offer remediation for students who aren't having success in their core classes and general education classes. So this is one support that we have that would be helping our students. The hope always is that when you offer intense interventions, that student would show growth and then no longer need that intervention. Check and Connect is another program that our school district has been very invested in. The leadership team, which started before me, and Mr. Crane has done a wonderful job with, and working with the Minnesota Department of Education, is really focused on students of color, specifically Black, African American, and American Indian, and focusing on graduation rates in the area of special education. I think we've seen some really good growth. We've presented on this before and stated that and shown some of the great things that Check and Connect is doing. We're recently having some scale-up conversations about how we can expand those services. It's currently at Denfeld, but we've seen great results. We've said this is a great evidence-based practice identified by the Minnesota Department of Education. We're seeing results. How can we continue to grow this? Another piece that we're doing is community schools. So we enter in partnership with the Duluth Community School Collaborative, which we talked a little bit about earlier. We do that at Denfeld, at Lincoln, and at Myers-Wilkins, and we're continuing to talk about how we can expand that program. They provide connections to the community, more resources, and there's a huge wealth of evidence to talk about how community schools support improved graduation rates and improved academic outcomes. Denfeld also has a program called BAR, Building Assets and Reducing Risks. This is a 9th grade program they do to support students in graduating and working for high achievement for all. When students aren't successful at a traditional school, we do have ALC and AEO. Students have the opportunity to take AEO classes, but also we have the Alternative Learning Center where students can go here if they are credit deficient. So this would be a way to catch up. We're currently working on ways to move credit recovery out to the sites, and so talking about reducing barriers for students, that would be one way to do that, by bringing credit recovery out to them. We do some wonderful things with our special education department. We have a whole wealth of resources and a continuum of services to meet students' needs. So our students who qualify for special education have all sorts of different opportunities, and it's through that Setting 1, 2, 3-year program courses, which is really exciting to help close those gaps in high achievement for all. Professional learning communities. So we have a PLC handbook, which is accessible to all of our staff and our leaders. And the PLC handbook really talks about how this really gets at the meat of how to focus on standards, how to measure where students are at, asking the questions, what do we want students to know, what will we do if they know it, what do we know if they don't know it, and focusing on that core instruction. We also have MTSS. So MTSS is a response intervention is another word that's sometimes used with that. We've shifted to the word MTSS. And so this looks at when a student is not having success in the classroom, when we've gone through that PLC process, then what? What's the next level of intervention that we can offer? Different sites have different levels of programming, but we do offer when we look at the data and say based on the data, this would be a good next step, that's what we would do. We also have a Families in Transitions program. And so for students that are homeless, or in transition, we offer supports to them and connect them to resources to be successful in school.
There are a couple of things that I was asked to talk about. One of them is we have a partnership with St. Louis County Public Health, specific to mental health. And so there's really some good partnership and expertise in suicide prevention and Sources of Strength grant funded program that we're implementing at Denfeld and East, and then some mental health training. So we're doing some professional development support with St. Louis County Public Health. So for instance, we just had a relicensure night at East. We had about 93 staff go through QPR training, or it's an acronym for Question, Persuade, and Refer Suicide Intervention Prevention Training. And that was taught by, in partnership with Public Health. It was actually Carleton County Public Health that came up and taught that one, but we work with St. Louis County and Carleton County. So we're also working with Sarah Miller and the Make It Okay campaign, so you might see weekly messaging coming out through our district correspondence. A lot of that information is coming from the Make It Okay campaign and working with Sarah Miller for the month of May. And then Sarah's provided some training and expertise with our continued trials of mental health screening tools, and we're developing some suicide and crisis intervention protocols going forward yet this spring. Ultimately, I think we need to develop a regular training schedule, formalize our protocols, and incorporate early detection for mental health needs into our social-emotional behavioral side of the multi-tiered system of support. Second area is positive behavior intervention and support strategies. It's also known as the social, emotional, and behavioral side of MTSS, which is a narrower scope of work than positive school climate. Positive school climate's much broader than just PBIS or the social, emotional, behavioral side of MTSS. All schools use a wide range of positive behavior intervention and supports. Don't let anybody tell you that they don't. 6 of our schools have completed or are in the process of completing a 2-year implementation on PBIS with the Minnesota Department of Education. And here we need to work with district leadership teams to determine minimum expectations and minimum resources for both that social emotional behavioral side of MTSS and positive school climates. I think those were the 2 I was going to talk about.
Okay, we also have a program called Project Dreamcatcher, and that's in conjunction with MDE and special education, and we focus on making sure that as our American Indian students are being referred into special education, they have the cultural awareness piece added to their referral process. And so currently my 4 staff, along with Myers Wilkins and Laura MacArthur, have been trained in the Dreamcatcher process. And it's more than just a one-time training. We do monthly phone conversations. There's check-ins consistently with the MDE staff that are providing this for our special education team. And they're always there to support if anyone has any questions in regards to, like the referral process or anything in regards to special education. So I feel like this is really keeping our students on track in regards to education and their IEP, and just keeping them going where they need to go educationally wise. We also have my American Indian Education Department. As you all know, each year I present a resolution of concurrence and non-concurrence, and I believe through that process and working hand in hand with the district, making sure that the needs are met for our American Indian students, and they are moving forward towards graduation. And then we also have the Masabi Congo Ojibwe Immersion Program, and I believe one of the strategies that we brought forward was being able to provide a experience in an environment for our American Indian students to really feel valued and comfortable and learning and being in a situation where they're working on their language and they're helping with their identity. We're hoping through that strategy, our students, as they move forward to middle school and high school, they'll feel valued and a little bit more sure about themselves, fitting in a system that wasn't necessarily created for them. So that's, another strategy as far as moving towards graduation for our American Indian students, because looking at the data, I see there are increases each year, but there's also decreases, and the increases are great, but they're not where they need to be.
Habojogin wago. Nui tajin Daniel Genego Gego, Nuishike Ejuebakin Ma Office Education Equity Asian Akadega. So I guess the one part about the Office of Education Equity that you can see on the slide is called the CARE Academy. It's a professional development program that we began a couple years ago. This last year, or this current year, we're actually implementing that specifically also at Lincoln Park Middle School. And the CARE Academy is specifically designed as a professional development opportunity to learn, practice, and implement strategies for closing achievement gaps. And so that is what that program is designed to do. We have cohort 2 this year, as well as cohort 1 from last year participating in that. And obviously it is our belief in the Office of Education Equity, and hopefully also within our district, that professional development is a priority area for closing achievement gaps and increasing graduation rates, because professional development is a pathway for us to learn how to change how we do things in our district. And so that change is necessary and very important. And so our CARE Academy is specifically designed to do that. The Office of Education Equity as a program, as I believe all of you know, is a support program that is designed to do two things: assist the district in the goals for high achievement for all, and also the other more specific piece of the Office of Education Equity is to cause integration at our school sites, specifically at our racially identifiable school site, which is currently and still for next year identified as Myers-Wilkins Elementary School. So we are a support program designed to support the district in our district efforts for high achievement for all.
Got it. Yeah, so mine, as far as CT goes, I did just like Dr. Lake did, and I strictly looked at this cohort from 17-18 for my data files. And so mostly what I wanted to kind of hit on is just we've shown in previous presentations about the impacts of CTE on the graduation rates, especially with the student groups that we do work with primarily in CTE. And these trends tended to fit in about with that. The interesting one to me was we were actually down 40 concentrators from last year's senior class of where we've kind of been on average. We have seen an overall enrollment increase that you heard in February, but this cohort tended to have just less seniors looking at it. Our graduation rate was 2% lower than it was the previous year, but we still are at 88% for kids that take 2 or more CT classes. And so there's still those parts that prove that CT helps. Even district-wide, and if I break it down by site between the 2 high schools, they're still above the average than what we're seeing at the site individually with other classes. Special populations, those with special services were up with this cohort. And again, their graduation rate is still way higher than the district average. Last year they were at 71% on the 4-year graduation rate, and so that was up 4%. But we've been pretty stable on overall. We've had improved enrollment, like I mentioned. There's not more concentrators, and again, those are people that have taken 2 or more classes in a pathway area. And so, to me, the biggest one as we start looking at the cohorts is we still struggle with getting them. We get them to graduation, which is great. Our biggest weakness is getting that percentage that go into higher education or directly into the workforce is still pretty low as a district. So I've been trying to work with my staff on how do we connect more where the kids understand the college credits they're getting through articulations or what their certificates mean as far as the workforce. But overall, yeah, we've been pretty stable. I didn't feel like filling you full of more numbers. You got enough of those already. So that's what I got.
And so I just want to say thank you to the team and to our staff and our building leadership. While we know we still have a ways to go to achieve high achievement for all students, and our North Star plan asks us by 2025 that we achieve that, thank you for all the work that you've done in the past and you continue to do to help students. We have a ways to go. We have more work to do, but thank you for taking time to highlight the things that you have been doing up to this point. Any questions about the presentation?
Well, maybe my questions will inspire other people. When I'm looking at the history by ENCODE in Dr. Lake's presentation, it was about 6% that is the dropout rate. Is there an actual number that corresponds to that 6%? Like how many students make up 6%?
I'd have to do the math. I don't know that offhand. I believe our cohort was, the graduating class was, I'd have to do the math.
So, Director Netland, that math pilot might help us, just saying. I think I can do the math myself, but I just thought you might have that number.
I don't have it off the top of my head. Yeah.
And then my other question is, when we're talking about the 7-year graduation rate, are all of those students included in the 7-year graduation rate special education students? Or students receiving special education, sorry.
The majority of them are, yes.
What would be an example of a student not receiving special education circumstances or services graduating in 7 years? That's a really long time for a regular education kid. I don't know of any example that. Anyone?
Maybe a student who maybe took some time off and then came back to ALC, or did independent study. They can have up to 3 years to complete an independent study program. So there's a few different ways that they could accomplish that.
Thank you for those examples. Member Gorham.
Excuse me, home. I don't need to talk about how the graduation rates are concerning when you break it down any certain way. I think we all know that. I think we're all concerned about that. I want to be thoughtful because I know we all care about that and we're invested in changing that. But I'm going to really challenge us to think beyond. We have a lot of work to do and a long way to go. I think we have a lot of programs and it's evidence that we're trying. But I'm not sure that there's a good book. It's called Trying Hard Isn't Good Enough. And I think we need to
think we need to get down to the root of this. And I'm not sure we have. I think our numbers would change by now if we had. I don't think we've gotten down to the root of it. So the challenge and the question is, how do we get down to the root of it? And how do we invest in solutions that we know are going to work? We got some good data with Check and Connect. I heard that. I know we got some good data with some other things. So I'm giving credit, but I'm also giving a challenge. Those are my thoughts. So thank you all. I think we all recognize that, and just want to put that challenge out there.
Thank you, Member Gorham. Along that line, I guess I have a question, or maybe it's a comment, because I don't know that anybody here will have any answers to this, but I find it curious that, and this is just one example, I don't mean to pick on any one group, but when I look at the homeless populations at Denfeld graduating at 53%, and then the homeless population at East graduating at 77%, almost to 78%. I'm confused because those are two groups that have relatively similar circumstances, that they don't have a home and they don't have a stable place to lay their head every night. Why those graduation rates are still dramatically different between schools. I can't make that same comparison for American Indian students because East doesn't have any notable ones that we can look at. And the numbers of other students of color at East are significantly smaller than at Denfeld. But those curiosities to me show me that there's an advantage to going East. And I don't want to say that, because we should have equal opportunities at both of our high schools. What those advantages are, and how we can duplicate them, I don't know. But I think that is kind of at the root of what Member Gorham was hinting at, that there's certain circumstances that happen in one building and not the other. And we have to fix those. And we need to identify them in order to fix them. And I think we can keep throwing program after program after program there at things, and still it's not going to help unless we know what the causes are. We talk about a math pilot that's very successful, but yet almost all the cohort is white. From what I understand, was that true? How many students of color were in there?
It's named after the entire grade who are in that particular course.
How many students of color are there, though?
Many.
Many compared to what? Is that...
Every student who self-selected into that particular course is receiving that instruction with those materials.
Okay. I still don't see that as a concrete number.
Can I clarify that?
Please do.
From my understanding, and you can tell me if I'm right or not. So in 8th grade, people either self-selected into the sort of accelerated course, or they were in the course that was getting this CBM. And the people who self-selected into accelerated were very largely white population. So a lot of the white students did not get CBM.
That's where I got confused.
Other
Thank
students
you for that.
did. So non-white students, the majority of non-white students got CBM.
I understood it as the accelerated kids got the CBM, so I'm glad that was clarified.
Yep.
Thank you for that. Now I completely lost track of where I was, but anyways. So I would love to know, when we hear about programs, like when we hear about MTSS, I would like to know what the target problem those different programs are addressing, so we know that what we're identifying and what problem we have identified and what problem we're tackling. When we hear about Care Academy, I would like to know what specific problem is that addressing. The same thing with everything, so then we can start creating a culture where we identify our problems and can say we're tackling them, because I think that's what our community also needs to hear, is that yes, we figured out the problems and we're doing this to identify them, and it's a direct link and a direct correlation to what it is and where we're going. I don't think we have that language as board members right now. We have to create it ourselves, and I think it would be very helpful to have that language implemented into our conversations as board members.
I know if Member Trinko were here, she would say we need to name this and put voice to it. And so I'm going to point out that we still have less than half of our American Indian students graduated this past year, and that's unacceptable. And I then wanted to also sort of narrow down, when we're talking about graduation rates, we're talking about the distance between 9th grade and 12th grade. And you've presented a whole bunch of the efforts across the district, but a number of those are not at the high school level. And so I just wanted to clarify what we're doing in the high school to get kids from 9th to 12th grade. And so we've got Check and Connect, we've got BAR, we've got math in 9th grade starting next year. And then we have these, MTSS is district-wide, community schools, but what are we actually doing to make sure 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders, what other interventions are we offering? And are we doing any examination of where kids get off track? Is it 9th grade? Is it 10th grade? Is it math? Is that the gateway? More specifically, where are kids getting off track? Are we doing any work to understand that?
Go ahead, Dr. Lake.
I wish the principals were here from our high schools to speak to that, because they do have processes in place where they're reviewing student data at each of the grade levels. They're looking at attendance, they're looking at behavior, they're looking at grades and core classes, a variety of different things that I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking about on their behalf. But I do think that would be something that would be helpful to hear as a board.
So let's schedule that, please.
Member Lafleur-Kemp.
Yeah, I just thank you all for your different presentations of a lot of different initiatives, both at all levels. And I was especially pleased to have Ron Lake present about mental health initiatives and programming, both community-wide that we're involved with as well, because I think we also know at the heart of so many issues that are impacting our kids is issues around mental health district-wide. So I'm glad that you included that. I'm glad of some of the new initiatives like the Sources of Strength that is happening in the high school level at both schools, I believe, and it was started by students. I had the opportunity last week to hear one of our students on a panel talk about helping to start that initiative and that. So when I'm hearing all of these things, I am really pretty grateful that we are looking at what we're doing with the community as a whole as well, and the ways that we are pulling in, whether it's community elders to help us or community partnerships, because I think we all know mental health and poverty are playing into this in a lot of different ways. So I guess just as I'm sitting here kind of reflecting on the presentations that you did, I want to, highlight that and keep us thinking about poverty and mental health.
I was just going to add to the conversation that while we gave kind of a brief overview of a lot of the district programs, absolutely, and the intent today was to keep it brief because there's so much there. But if there is specific desire in regards to some of the programs we talked about, or looking at the high schools or something, we can definitely do something in the future. So, and was hoping that this might generate some conversations and some thoughts about that. So, thank you very much for your thought on that.
I guess I'd like to offer too that if you have specific questions about PBIS or the Mental Health Partnership or the social emotional behavioral side of MTSS or school climate, I'd certainly be open to sharing more information too.
Go ahead.
So tonight we highlighted the graduation rates portion of World's Best Workforce and the North Star Plan, and our hope is that in the coming months we'll be going over each section of our plan as a district, from kindergarten readiness to third grade reading, reducing the achievement gap, and college and career readiness. So we'll be going over that as well over the coming months.
Go ahead.
Thanks. This is a question that comes off of Brad's last note here. He said, struggle with placement in higher education, 31%. I had I don't know if it was a teacher or a community member, ask me, does the district keep track of what happens to kids after they graduate? I mean, either in terms of success at university, do they drop out, do they get jobs? Do we have any? I didn't think we did, but I don't know if we keep track of anything.
Go for it.
The Special Services Department is charged with post-school outcome surveys. So we do that every other year about, and we have to call up a percentage of our graduation students and find out, track what they're doing, have they enrolled in college and or successful with a career venture, and that data is public knowledge actually. So that's one data source for students that were on IEPs.
But is that only students on IEPs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you done, Member Kirby?
Yes.
Okay,
sorry.
I just didn't want to call on Member Lafferty unless you were done. Go ahead, Member Lafferty.
Yeah, two things. One is I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about some of the work development opportunities that I know you're providing special ed kids at the high school level. And then just a second thing, and I wish Brad would have been here, but I happen to be a part of a organization that gives grants to young women, or not grants, but scholarships. And one of the scholarship winners this year is a Denfeld woman who was in the welding program and is going to a 4-year college. And that was those kind of correlations, as well as she had a great application, is why she got that particular scholarship. So yay for that one individual there. But if you could kind of address some
of the work-based
learning? Work-based learning, yeah.
So most commonly in 11th and 12th grade, Duluth Public Schools is doing a pretty good job with work-based learning opportunities, especially for our DCD and ASD Setting 3 program students. We have opportunities for LD, EBD, other disability area students as well, but supported work-based learning where we have job coaches and special education teachers to train them. We get them here to the Hawks building, up to St. Scholastica College, at several of our Super One locations. We have about 15 different sites, including, I just thought of another one, it's the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and we wash some police cars up on the hill too with the state trooper cars. So a number of different opportunities for kids, students in our schools to practice these skills. It is IEP driven. It's a team-based decision. And if we ever had an extra $1 million, we could use more opportunities. We could expand this program, to say the least. And I like the start of this presentation. Dr. Lake highlighted that for special education students, our greatest charge is to make sure that they're ready to graduate. And it is more common for students to not graduate in 4 years when you have an IEP than it is to graduate on a 4-year track. So we really have IEP individual decisions to make sure that students are ready to graduate, and we have a 18 to 21-year-old program with a couple teachers that will keep kids past their graduation expected 4-year date to continue to practice those skills and make sure that their IEP graduates them ready to join the next program for them. Make sense?
My son is a proud 4-year graduate with an IEP and is very successful at Lake Superior College. Member Sansa, did you still have something to say? All right, well, thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. I hope we have more fruitful discussions in the future. Oh, Member Loughlin,
Sure.
did you have something else?
I looked back on my notes, and I did have a question. I can't remember who brought it up about the credit recovery program. That's came up over the last couple of years. So what is our potential plan to bring it back to the sites? Did you mention that, or who mentioned that?
I did. So I can share some information, and Superintendent Gronseth, if you have a little more, please feel free to jump in. But one of the barriers to receiving credit recovery is that we have to get students down here, and there's some time issues and some transportation issues and just how that all works out. And part of the idea with moving school within a school and the kind of the way it's been done here at the ALC out to the schools is as an add-on to that is we can do our credit recovery actually at the sites. So we've reduced that barrier. We're bringing technology out to the sites. Actually, within a school program, we'll be bringing Chromebooks out and supplying those. And so one of the things that our Alternative Learning Center really prides themselves on is we're ready to meet you on demand when you're ready to learn. And so by providing a little bit different platform, by using some technology, they're able to create supports for kids and help them access learning a little bit more on their time, which sometimes for some of our learners, they need that. If I'm a student that needs to go to work, for example, or has some other things going on in life, I can work around my schedule a little bit more when I'm ready to engage. So that's some of the work that we're looking to do next year, and I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the School Within a School program will be focused on the core, so literacy, math, social studies, and science. And that I just wanted to also mention that the credit recovery will still be available here as well, but for those students who would best be served at their site, that they'll be able to do that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That first time around was just a trick. No. Now I'm kind of feeling lonely at this table because it was full and now it's empty.
Do you need a companion?
I do. Yep. Yes, her. It's okay. It's Pepper. Yes, we're talking about my daughter's service dog. Well, therapy dog, not service dog. Anyway, all right. Next up, we have the musical instruments resolution. Oh, wait. Nope, we don't. Yes, we do. That's next. Never mind. It is. The rental fee increase request is action item 2A1. So, why don't you take it away, Ms. Netland?
Sure.
Oh, Donner. Oh, did we forget grant? Oh, I'm sorry. We forgot grant application. Anyone have a question about any of the grants? There are 5 of them with lots of money attached to them. And now we're going to have a grant partnership with Lake Superior College about Algebra 2 alignment, but I don't know how that'll work. Now, if we go forward with a math adoption, that's kind of tricky.
I will clarify on that one. We're not doing a math adoption. We're doing
That's
a
right.
pilot with a cohort.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The math pilot with the cohort, should it come to an adoption of that agreement collaboration might have to be figured out in the future, a long time from now.
I can speak to this because I'm managing both of these concurrently.
Okay.
So the purpose of this joint partnership is to align our Algebra 2 course that students already are required to take to graduate with the developmental Algebra 2 course offered by LSC. We have a large percentage of students who attend LSC, and so the unintended barrier that happens is if students basically what this does is that it reduces a barrier for students so that if they have passed Algebra 2 in Duluth Public Schools, regardless of which site they attend, with an A or a B, they automatically waive the requirement for taking a developmental math course. It also enables them to immediately, following successful completion of that course, be available to have the opportunity of taking CITS pre-calc. So it's trying to eliminate barriers for college access for students.
I like it. Thank you. Anybody have a question on that? Okay, now we get to talk about musical instruments. I was just so excited. Maybe you should sing. I don't know.
I don't think you want me to. Thank you. So musical policy. I wanted to talk through this with you just because I'm suggesting something it is a change, and I'm hoping it will relieve pressure on our music team and also still keep you in the loop at the same time. So looking at the musical instrument policy first reading, you'll notice a new number, and that is simply because we're in our process of moving to MSBA. We're changing our numbers from the thousands to the hundreds. This is actually not an MSBA template policy. There is no guidance on this policy. So in part of the revision, I actually called MSBA, and their recommendation was to either not have a policy and simply put our music fees in our student handbook and handle it that way, or to continue having a policy and then rather than have the specific fees right in there, have general guidance in the policy and then refer to the student handbook for those annual fees. So what I did as a revision was to keep the policy, simply give it a new number, and then take out the specific fees annually and refer people back to the family and student handbook, which is where most of our fees are provided. And in fact, these fees currently are in the handbook. It would simply be, look here, rather than having to go through 2 readings of a policy every time for a fee change.
I have a couple questions on that. In the second paragraph, it says that large instruments such as timpanis, chimes, tubas, etc., will be furnished by the school board to the bands and orchestras. Do I deliver instruments that I didn't know about?
Nope, that is actually current language in our policy.
Right, I know. So can we change that?
Would you like it to say designee? I think
I would like it to not be me.
We could say school district would be an easy change.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then in your explanation for your recommendation of the language for the rental fees, you just listed for 2 instruments. That led me to, before I read the policy, I read your letter, and I'm like, why are we charging more than double for 1 instrument for 2 instruments? And then I read in the policy about the 2 instruments, about large instruments. So can that clarification be added to your explanation? So
to the letter?
Yeah, well, to whatever goes into the student handbook, because 1 instrument is $30 and 2 instruments is $125, and you're like, why isn't 2 instruments $60 or $50?
Yeah,
you normally get a break when you get 2 instruments, but I understand why. It just is unclear.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Thanks for that. I think that will go through. Any questions about our acceptance of grants? Anyone? Am I here all alone? Oh. We have the Denville High School Jazz Band going somewhere to Eau Claire. And the host of students going to their national competition in Orlando. That's fun. We have diploma requests. We have a data sharing agreement for Upward Bound at the University of Minnesota. Anybody have questions about that? Future items, we have policy updates. If there are no further questions, yay, okay, we'll go with Superintendent Granzas.
I just wanted to ask if there are any questions about the response to the concurrence, non-concurrence.
Oh, did I skip that? Where did that go? Oh, geez, I'm sorry. I'm a bad person here. Shouldn't share these things. There. Okay, let's move back to the concurrence, non-concurrence. We need to talk about that. Would you like to talk about that, Superintendent Granzas?
I can talk about that.
All right.
We have had an opportunity and when I say we, I mean Gail and I, to sit down with Edie, who was here, and go over our response to this as a district. I can kind of walk us through this if you'd like. I wish there were numbers on these boxes, but anyway, we'll just we'll start at the top and work our way down.
Okay.
The recommendations that they had was for float staff to be trained, and I did reach out to Pam and to Jen and ask about specifically what trainings we have provided this year, and Gail was part of those conversations as well, and there have been very specific cultural trainings for staff, and we suggest that we keep those going, and that they have been effective. I think one was just this week, wasn't it? Or is that another one? Last month, okay. Last month, this week, it kind of blends together after a while, doesn't it? The next one was a request to utilize funding from an ELL program, and that we're still looking into that more deeply, but we understand that may be applicable with students who have Ojibwe or another American Indian language as their first language, and they're an English language learner. However, our ELL program, the revenues are about $20,000, and the expenditures are in the $200,000s, and so that's not a place where we have really extra funding to apply, but students who are behind in reading should be receiving services as our elementary schools go through their MTSS process and have specific interventions that should be available for our students. We also talked about making sure that the American Indian staff is part of our MTS training and our MTS structure, so it gets built in to the process. Next line, again, was regarding MTSS, and we talked about how Edie has connected with our curriculum specialists and collaborated and supported her staff and our staff to make sure that they're part of the MTSS training, and we recommend that continue. The next piece, we are continuing with reading core and class size. We do try to keep those as small as possible. And again, talking about how there's been collaboration with our curriculum specialists to make sure that our teachers are receiving American Indian specific materials, that they're reviewing the standards, and we have provided funding and some ELA adoptions, Spirit Car being one of them, and some specific trainings being offered around that, and making sure that we are continuing to provide more materials, and I believe there is an opportunity for other materials and other trainings as well. Talking about the graduation rate, we were just speaking about part of that, and the request was for Saturday school to continue and for win time. I also talked about DASH, which is Denfeld After School. Oh, what does the H stand for? Help? Help. Is it help? I think so. I can't remember. I just call it DASH now. And then Check and Connect as well, which we talked about a little bit. And integration specialists also reaching out with those supports. Asking for students who receive special education services to receive career and college readiness guidance. That we are hopeful that is already happening. We plan to check in with staff and confirm that that's in place. Also, students who are part of Check and Connect at Denfeld would also be receiving some of those services through Check and Connect, and also in our CTE programs. They have opportunities as well. And so we're hoping that that's in place, and we'll check on that. More professional development training days or online learning opportunities. We did have a discussion about online learning, and Edie needs to follow up on that a little bit. looking at possibly using a program like Infinitec. Someone had a very specific idea, and we're looking to get the details from that. But also some opportunities that were available this year are listed on here. Also wanted to highlight that there's a new teacher licensure requirement starting in 2020 that includes cultural competency requirements. So as teachers are renewing their licensure, that there will be a requirement for some cultural training, and that will give us an opportunity to provide specific training as well. There was a request to increase funding, and while we're increasing access to interventionists for all students, we did add some math interventionists this year as well to go along with the literacy, and we want to make sure that all of our students have more access. We don't have funds to add specifically to this program. However, we learned through the budget process that not all of the funds were being accessed for American Indian education from the federal side. So we're going to work with staff to make sure that we are utilizing all the funds that are available. There's a comment about the coordinator. We did add a 0.6 coordinator in as a result of last year's concurrence and non-concurrence, but once we got going, there's a request to use that staffing differently for this year, and so we've already put that in place, and so we'll look at how they're using their staffing this year. Also wanted to note that the curriculum department does fund some of the curriculum development activities for the immersion program as well, and that was one of the requests noted. Talking about space at our buildings, I think at most of our spaces there are dedicated spaces. A few of our buildings that are really full and really busy with lots of itinerant staff, they're having a hard time dedicating a space to any one of our supports, and so we will talk with principals and encourage them to have dedicated space whenever possible. However, we recognize that some buildings just are so busy and so full that they aren't able to dedicate a space. And then the final piece was, again, for resources or funding from general fund or title programs to increase the amount of staff in our American Indian department. I know that this year there was funding, but they were not able to find candidates to fill the positions that they had. And so we're hoping that we will be able to fill the positions that we have. And then there's a request also to increase the office support specialist. It took me a while to figure out what OSS stood for. I think Gail helped me figure that one out. That it was office support specialist, not out of school suspension. And we requested that they work with HR to determine the appropriate number of hours based on the job description and job duties that they've provided. So, like I said, we had an opportunity to go through this with Gail. We did make a few edits together on this as well once we got through it, but that is the response.
So I have a couple of questions. I don't remember Lafleur Company. Does your like pertain to this?
No,
okay.
It doesn't, so go ahead.
Right. Under the read well by third grade.
Yep.
Do we count the American Indian students that have Ojibwe as a first language in our ELL count already?
If when they enrolled, they listed themselves as an English language learner, so that Ojibwe was their first language, they would be counted in that number. But only if they identified themselves as an English language learner, which is probably pretty rare.
Okay. Well, I just would hope that, you know, we continue to document that as well as possible, because that's the only way we can increase our ELL funding is to have more students that qualify for that funding. And if they're already here, that's a source of revenue that we're missing, even if it is, you know, tiny, it's still something. My other question is, if we took this entire spreadsheet and had to add a column that just said yes or no to their recommendations, would we have any yeses? I see a lot of well maybes, and no's, but I don't see any direct. This is what they're recommending, and we say absolutely yes. So
I think there would be more. We're already doing this, and we're working on this together. Pieces, then there would be no's.
Okay.
And as we work through this with Edie as well, she said, "Yeah, I mentioned that we do that, or I mentioned that we do this." And part of this is the parent group prepares the concurrence and non-concurrence.
Sure.
And so. Even when we're talking about the revenue pieces or the coordinator pieces, and I said, well, we provided the coordinator last year, and she said, yep, they just didn't want it taken away. And so it was kind of a note that, yep, okay. we did that, or yep, we are working together on professional development, and it's too bad Edie had to take off, but part of it was recognizing that, yeah, we're doing that, and we don't want to lose it. We want to keep doing it.
So that begs this next question of, yes, we're already doing it and we're implementing it, and yet our achievement for our American Indian students are falling. So is what we're doing good enough? I don't expect an answer to that. I think we all know that we're not meeting a need somewhere and somehow. So I appreciate that we have responses. Am I sad that we can't have better responses? Yes, but we have to figure this out. Any other questions about this specifically?
Yeah, I just was going to mention where it mentions the reading corps. I wonder if it makes sense just to kind of put a note that is just for pre-K through third grade, that particular program. I don't know how specific it needs to be, but yeah. Just a point in there of clarification for anybody who might look at this and think we're doing reading corps in high school or something, or middle school, because as we know, that's not how that program is funded. Yeah.
And I guess I have another question related to reading corps as, does the district view reading corps as an official intervention, or is it just a support?
That would be part of our MTSS supports for literacy.
So it can't be an intervention for kids that need help specifically? I'm thinking of interventionists and programs for that sort of thing. I'm specifically thinking of schools that don't have a lot of interventionists, but just a reading corps member or so, like at Lakewood.
Maybe I can clarify a little bit.
Sure.
So Reading Corps has evidence-based interventions that their staff are trained by AmeriCorps or by Reading Corps. And so we don't provide the training for that. They train their own, and then they have set guidelines on who they can take for intervention. Their goal is targeting students who are just below grade level to start, getting them through interventions with the idea that once they get up to grade level, they can take another layer. So that is it. They meet a need in our system, but they don't function in the same way as our interventionists who are on staff as district employees.
Okay. That's the clarification I needed. Thank you.
I appreciate you clarifying that. And Member Oswald, if you want more information on the Reading Corps, I actually did that for 2 years, so I'm very familiar with how that program works and the training that I received and the questions I would get from parents who would want their kids to be involved, but the kids didn't qualify.
Right.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think I went through the rest of the of the agenda already, and so I think we're on to last minute things. Member Lafleur-Kemp?
Yeah, and so I had put my light on because I was approached by some students and community members about adding a special resolution similar to what we did last month with the Mental Health Awareness Month, and so I guess I wanted to say I'd like to do a special resolution when this comes up, it would fall under the education, and I can forward you the resolution. And what it's for is for National Gun Violence Awareness Day, which is on June 7th. And again, this came from students, and it would be a resolution that recognizes that Gun Awareness Day and honors victims and survivors of gun violence, and supports schools supporting community efforts to prevent further gun violence in our schools. And so I can get you the actual resolution, but I guess I wanted to give a heads up if I could bring it forward as a special resolution like we did last month with the mental health awareness resolution. Am I clarifying that enough? Okay.
All right.
Great. Thank you.
And with that, I say we are adjourned.